Good afternoon, NPS faculty, students, and staff, and to our online viewers. Welcome to today's Secretary of the Navy guest lecture. Today's topic is Fifth Domain Competition, and we're very pleased to have with us Mr. Jason Zander, the Executive Vice President of Strategic Missions and Technologies at Microsoft. Our NPS President, Vice Admiral Rondeau, will host a fireside chat-style conversation with Mr. Zander, and then we'll open the floor to Q&A first here in King Hall, and then to our viewers out online if we have time. Thank you very much, and ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Vice Admiral Rondeau and Mr. Zander.
Good afternoon. I hope that everybody's had a good day and a good Monday, and it's great to have all of you here. This fireside chat format with an industry leader is something that our Warrior Scholar students have been asking for. We have a lot of really excellent speakers by podium, but what you've asked for is, can we have some more conversations and do it with industry? I cannot think of a better person to start that with in response to your request than Mr. Jason Zander. I met him a few months ago when we had a trip up to Redmond to see Microsoft after almost a year of working with a terrific Microsoft team that's all sitting in the front row, and thinking about how we not only capitalize on the numbers of projects over the last 3 years, about 16 between faculty and our Warrior Scholar students and Microsoft, but how to institutionally establish a relationship that really broadens the ability to do really big things and to understand how we grow as a nation. We certainly have a lot of things going on, but this notion of Microsoft and NPS coming together really points to the fact that warfighting is not just about those of us who've been or are in uniform. And what this partnership does with this CRADA, this cooperative research and development agreement, and we'll talk about that some more. But what it does, it acknowledges what NPS is seeking to become, and that is a technology problem-solving place where warfighters and warfighter supporters come and solve problems, create solutions. Anymore, you just cannot suddenly declare war. I would submit that we've been in a war for at least a decade. And there has not been a declaration of war, but there has been a commitment to understanding it better. We are in this now, and Microsoft is alongside. So in this discussion about the fifth domain of warfare, cyberspace and IT, what a better partner than Microsoft to have as we work this journey alongside and to develop some capacity and capability and some agility in this notion about decision advantage. I know that Mr. Zander will be talking about this in relationship to the various kinds of competitors that we have today, but decision advantage, that's what this is about. And we will explore that in a minute. So Jason, thank you for being here. What a privilege. Your schedule is manic, and the fact that you will be leaving this evening for an extended travels to Europe to be talking with your partners in the European capitals, we thank you very much. Let's talk a bit about your journey and how you see that journey within Microsoft, and how you see the world today relative to that journey and what you've learned.
Well, thank you, first of all, so much for having me here, Admiral. I really appreciate it. And also, thank you so much for the partnership. We're very excited about it, and we have a whole team here that's raring to go, so we really appreciate that. My own journey at Microsoft, this is my 30th year, actually, at Microsoft. If you remember Microsoft back then, we were still selling DOS, and there was no Windows, so probably dating myself at that point. But as a company, we've actually gone through a lot of cultural transformation ourselves. If we think about how we compete, how we actually build software, ship software, et cetera. And I think it's actually relevant to this space as well, because like if you think of us, we were building things, we were actually quite successful for a long period of time, actually a couple of decades, and yet the whole world changed around us. Adoption of newer technology, faster moving pace, et cetera. We had to make a lot of changes to actually not only survive, but also try and thrive in that environment. And so I've had an opportunity to see that. And of course, we're blessed with new technology that we're building. We're very excited about that and the opportunity everybody has internally. So we're excited about that journey. And I think I find a lot of similarities when I talk to my peers across the Defense Department.
So you talked about change and transformation. So the Department of Defense, higher education, every industry that you talk to is trying to understand the current world. And that means cultural questions within those organizations. I know that your CEO, Satya Nadella, wrote a great book called Hit Refresh about the changing of the culture in Microsoft. You've been alongside him for a long time, and you're now within the 30 years. What are your observations about culture change and organizational change and survival versus thriving?
Yeah. Hey, both Satya and I started at Microsoft in 1992, so we've seen the entire journey through that. I think one of the things that Satya loves to say is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Basically, the whole point is if you don't have your culture right, you can have the smartest strategy in the world, but a failure to execute on it. And that was certainly part of the issues that we had from a Microsoft perspective. If you've seen what we've done as a company for a long period of time, you would know that, of course, we created two very successful businesses, Windows and Office. We tried to ship new versions of those every 2, maybe 3 years, mostly succeeded, not always. But then the opportunity to come back and say, well, how do we move that faster? The other thing we had an issue with is a lot of tribalism. There's a lot of, kind of these joke org cartoons that you may have seen. The Steve Jobs Apple one had Steve in the middle, and then the whole company pointed to him. Well, the Microsoft one actually had like 3 product units together with guns pointing at each other. They forgot the knives in the circles. That was the other part of this. But it was a lot of essentially, one business against another. Like, I don't succeed until you fail. We had a lot of those kind of attitude things. Some of it was just born in competition. Like, we love to compete. And for a while there, that was your best competition. But I think the thing that Satya came along and recognized was that's just no way for us to go forward as a company. That there's actually plenty of opportunities, and the more we collaborate, the more successful that we can be. And then instituting that into the strategy, actually figuring out ways and rewarding people that if I'm actually helping someone else, I get credit for that. I don't get dinged for it. That's a major cultural transformation. That plus the necessity to say, you got to be agile. You've got all these startups in the Valley. They're moving super, super fast. And you're kind of looked at as this dinosaur that just, you ship and you're slow and everything else. That's kind of the culture that we had. And so it's been a big transformation. None of us will claim that we're done yet. We will not also claim that we are perfect at it. I feel like we've made a lot of very good progress, but it's a journey. And with culture, I think you're never quite done. You're always constantly trying to push for being better.
So how do you reconcile speed and urgency with just very deliberate planning and experimenting to a point where you can then develop quality? How do you do that as you change your culture?
And I think that one of the biggest changes for us, and of course we're in software obviously, so that lends itself to a certain type of planning. The way we used to do things was to make these big grandiose plans, like it's going to be Windows 8, it's going to be awesome with tablets and blah, blah, blah. And if you get it wrong, you're multiple years in before you realize it, which was a big problem. And one of the biggest evolutions in software and that innovation side is being able to figure out more incremental progress. And so like the last time you probably saw Office number, you don't see that anymore. If you have Office, it's like, hey, there's some new features this morning. It's like, well, it turns out those have been in development for quite a while. And so that ability to be agile and to move through, and even some of the projects that we're collaborating on, I think you've started to see some of that actually. Being able to move super quick. We have a strategic direction. It's enduring. We know what our values are. We know what we want to be in a few years. But then binding back to the projects, we can do more agile planning. And then that way, if you can fail fast on something, you should. And if you need to pivot something, you can. And being able to move through has actually been very helpful for us. And that's how we get out of this, oh shoot, we slipped a product after 2.5 years, or ship shipped it, even worse. We actually shipped it and nobody wanted it. That's the worst place to land. And so that kind of ability to be agile and move quicker through things. We do have bigger projects, just to be clear. We've spent, and this is all in the public record, but we've spent tens of billions of dollars on capital building out data centers around the planet. We have a run rate in capital you can see in our own financial reporting. So, you know, I used to, when I ran the cloud for 10 years, I used to approve almost $2 billion of capital a month. That's a lot. So it's not that we don't have also the big decisions. It's not all just software to go build it, but being able to get that longer term planning, marrying it to more agile execution, being able to fail fast and pivot has been a real big change for us, and it's been super helpful.
So the environment that we're in, national security environment, the speed and urgency of change that is required. Let's shift a little bit, though, to one of the long poles in that tent of change, and that is cybersecurity. Everything from utilities to war is dominated now. And one of the ironies about Ukraine and the Russo-Ukraine war, so you have World War II vintage tanks up against cyber and hackers who are not even in uniform, and the whole notion of this fifth domain competition. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that is influencing everything that's going on right now?
Yeah, it's actually something we've been anticipating. We've made massive investments in cyber, and it's one of those things where you're never done. We've committed to spending $20 billion over the next 5 years in cyber investments alone, and that includes like over 8,000 just full-time folks on that. We process about 24 trillion signals a day, actually, for cyber-related exercises. The one thing that was super interesting to us is that as the lead up to the war in Ukraine kicked off, we actually started detecting massive cyber attacks coming from Russian state actors. In fact, we actually found and blocked over 237 of those that actually showed up. The most interesting thing to us, because of course this is just commercial software that I'm talking about, this is not high-side projects. The thing that was most interesting to us was seeing the correlation between those cyber attacks and kinetic action being taken in the actual war. And so it would be anything from, we saw a cyber attack and then someone tried to take over the communications stack, like the satellites and the local communications on that. Actually seeing movements of weapons coming with that. We were able to actually see that in this case through commercial activity. And so when you think about that, it's like, wow, okay, there's a whole bunch, we never expected that we would be in a position as a commercial software company where we would see that, but it just shows you how intrinsically woven these things are. This is a case of war, but now also imagine securing our critical infrastructure, right? Our borders, our water, our gas supplies, agriculture, all the other things that you need as a sovereign country to make sure that you're in a good spot. You've got some world-class folks out there with unlimited budgets and nation states that are figuring out every single day how to go after that stuff and build offensive capabilities. That's something we just have to keep up with, and we have to be able to partner together on that.
So on May 2nd, when you invited us to Microsoft's National Security Symposium in DC, Satya made a comment on the stage that never before has industry been so much on the front line as Microsoft is in Ukraine. What does that mean?
So a great example of this is one of the attack vectors that we saw from some of these Russian state actors was to actually leverage malware. There was actually things disguised as malware, ransomware, stuff like that. But it actually was hiding a payload going after critical infrastructure, right, for disability. So using the mechanisms that we have, we not only were able to detect it, but be able to actually deploy a new fix in about 12 hours to block it, to make sure it can't go. So you talk about front lines. For us, and this is what we do for commercial, there's people that for, not in this case, obviously it's a war, but there are other cases where people going after for, ill-gotten financial gain, right, or ransomware, et cetera. So that front line is out there basically saying you have to assume breach, but how do we find that as fast as possible, and then how do you remediate it as quickly as possible to make sure that people can't get through those defenses? And as bad as ransomware and some of those things are, again, I shudder to think what would happen if people could really go after critical infrastructure and shut down, the whole East Coast of the United States and the power grid goes down. Now what would happen? I mean, those are the things that we have out there in the future. We've got to be able to figure out how to fix that. And that absolutely requires a private-public partnership to be able to do.
Yeah, we saw that with the Colonial shut down,
Yes.
certainly when the oil company shut down.
Absolutely.
So let's take that, though, one step farther. So you have the CEO of Microsoft in there with DoD talking about, in this case, an active war that has not been declared that, but obviously is. How do you think about yourselves in the space that you talk about, both financial war in terms of crime, this kind of an environment with regard to active war? How does Microsoft think about itself truly in that place called decision advantage? This is about making decisions quickly and smartly and effectively, and in our sense also ethically and morally. How do you see Microsoft or any of the IT firms that are inside that space providing decision advantage?
And I look at this, and there's kind of two angles. Briefly, there's how we would operate as a commercial company, and obviously we work through governments, we work with partners, and we take our guidance from that. We're a private company. It's not our job to go set global policy or be able to say that. So we want to work through that environment. And we can and will continue to do that. But we also believe that if you're leveraging or using our software and our products, it is our responsibility to make sure that we are protecting you as a user. So we're going to do that. The most interesting in the decision advantage part then I think comes back to how do we accelerate that loop? I mean, so much of what we're trying to do is I have data and I'm trying to get to a decision and get to the right decision as quickly as possible. That applies for so many things. It absolutely applies in the cyberspace. So to get that importance, it's a combination of getting those signals coming in. Like I mentioned, 24 trillion signals a day go through the system. We block basically password spray attempts, basically 1,000 at every hour that come through. Being able to see that corpus of data, be able to analyze it very quickly, and then especially leveraging machine learning or artificial intelligence, leveraging ML against that data helps us move incredibly fast so we can detect these things and move quickly. There's just no time to come back and do a project plan to see how do I shut down a zero-day exploit in malware, especially if the thing's trying to go after something critical. So the decision advantage has to be that data, and it's got to be the AI, and it's got to be the ability to then take it and take action on it as quickly as possible.
So let's take this one more. So with all that involved, wars and decision and speed and urgency, how would you describe the future for education in that space?
I think it applies so well, I think, because if you look at what's happening out there, you're going to have future adversaries of the countries that they are investing massively in infrastructure. They're investing massively in artificial intelligence. They're investing massively in technology that can and will be game changers. And I'm not talking about in 20 years. You're starting to see some of this stuff right now. Just the amount of innovation that comes through is just insane. And honestly, I think it's going to come down to our ability to adopt that technology and figure out practical ways to be able to leverage it to the advantage you require for your mission. Like, we have to be able to do that. And I can tell you the pace is moving astoundingly fast. And as much as you may look at one particular entity and say, well, gosh, maybe they, they have a particular set of capabilities. I don't know what just know that there are an amazing amount of innovation happening out there, and it's going to be our responsibility to keep up. I think our partnership, frankly, is another way of us exploring then what is the latest state of the art? What can and should we be doing? How do we take that as a tactical advantage, a strategic advantage, and just make sure that we're always at the forefront?
So one of the things that's happened is that with this CRADA, we're looking at different ways of knowledge acquisition, knowledge use, and applications of knowledge and research to problem solving, but we're looking at trying to make this a little different for DoD. So this notion of working this with Microsoft and CRADA is our first step to really changing up how we process knowledge and skills and apply them rather immediately to a problem that's in front of us and anybody that we serve and to go to. And it works in sort of a public-private partnership, but it's different. So one of the things that we are looking at with Microsoft is things like innovation labs, campus of the future, network and sensors, and a number of other things. and it's new and it's different. And so can you talk a little bit about what the creator means to Microsoft as we think about what the creator means to, I think, the nation as we explore new ways, not just to educate, but to truly create the ability to solve problems immediately and quickly?
Yeah, and we're excited about the innovation. When Satya asked me to create this new division after 10 years of building out cloud, it was precisely to say, hey, how do we push forward, not just a pure research way, like we're doing some research on the team as well, but do it in a way that can be applied, and we're interested in doing that. We have all this amazing technology, and to me, my expectation, hope would be it's mutually beneficial. From our perspective, we've got a lot of raw tech, we think it makes sense, but we want to get the feedback. Does it actually make sense to you? What could we be doing differently with it? That binding of that to actual scenarios, I think, really does help. And if I think about, basically future conflict, future missions that you have to be on, you're going to wind up seeing an amazing amount of technology. And I think the commercial sector has been going at warp speed on some of these areas. I can tell you we're moving super, super fast at this point. And there's going to be places where you're going to come up against that technology. So in some ways, we also feel like if there's a good way for us to be able to take that technology, bind it to that mission, get the feedback, we make our platform better. We're excited about that, absolutely. If it helps the mission and get on, then that's actually going to be a win-win for us.
How do you see human behavior relative to technology, to the ML, AI, the human-machine interface? What do you see that even in 10 years, I mean, it's changed, in the last 10 years by a lot, right? So this is a whole new age of things, and I think that this set of faculty and warrior scholars that are thinking about this have to really think through the human behavior, the psychology of this. You wouldn't think at times that technologists think about psychology, but what is your view about human behavior and how we think and how we make the decisions that we make as we interface more and more with technology?
I think that the most interesting thing, of course, is that the technology is getting so smart that it's able to go help us with many things. Now my question is, how and can and should I trust it? Like AI is a great example of this. We're starting to see more and more of it emerging in many different fields. Medical is another good example of this. If I actually have an AI algorithm that comes back and says, gosh, looking at your x-rays, I think you need surgery, you're going to want to talk to an expert and understand, is that actually the case? So, but it does bring back the okay, well, this is interesting. It could be a help, but and do I trust it? And how could I decide that I start to trust it? I think the one thing going forward is we want to develop those models in a way that it's not about them replacing humans. It's not about replacing that decision that ultimately has to be made by an expert with a ton of training. But it can be augmenting that, something that can look through lots of data quickly and give you an answer, but also explain why it arrived at that answer. That's going to be the trick, is to figure out that balance between those. And we've built some technology like that today, and we're starting off in some software development areas and some analyst areas like that I think are going to be helpful. But we've got to be able to figure out a way in which it is actually a help. It helps experts to get the job done. It's not to replace experts. It's not to replace the folks that are making decisions, but it is about augmenting that and helping you be much more successful and in a faster time, because that response time is just so critical, especially for what the folks here do.
So the Congress recently passed the National AI Initiative Act, and the White House recently came out with an announcement about quantum and to promote quantum technology. This is an interesting period of time. Probably not since we opened up highways and trains and did the interstate commerce system have we seen so much of government and industry thinking about things together. What do those kinds of movements by the government mean for AI and quantum computing that actually thrive in independence? And now we have these interesting movements by the government. What does that mean for not only you, but for all of your peer industry partners?
Yeah, I think there's big areas of brand new innovation that are game changing. AI is a great example, artificial general intelligence, AGI. If you look at some of the AI work we've done so far, we've got some of the world's biggest supercomputers working on this. We train models on basically 500 billion. That's like 500 some billion parameters, which is unheard of. We couldn't have done that years ago. And it's absolutely a game changer. And we certainly don't see a speed limit to that yet. So that's an amazing set of innovation. And there's not too many commercial companies that can do that, probably frankly us and a Google, but there's also of course a lot of Chinese companies that are very far along on these paths. So I think it's important that we continue to innovate in that space. Same thing on quantum. And if I think about big things that I expect to see in my lifetime that are transformative, artificial general intelligence, quantum computing, and some form of computational biology, if you think like CRISPR and things like that as well. There's a lot of Hollywood movies that explain what happens when those three come together in wrong ways. They're usually good for popcorn, but not really a place you want to live. So we need to figure out ways in which we can maintain that future and that advantage that we've got going forward. I think that's important that we're able to do that. We want to do it from a commercial perspective. I think you must have that from a U.S. perspective. So it's good that the U.S. government is investing and putting that priority on going forward. But we have to make sure that we're actually making those innovations. And quantum, I think, is one of the coolest ones that we have.
So it is cool, and we can go on to coolness. But you said something here. So you're writing the movie, and you're trying to either decide if it's going to be a dystopia movie or it's going to be a lovely movie that ends up with a happy ending. What worries you the most that we won't do?
I worry about our ability to adopt technology. When I say that is from a government perspective, I think you're finding that commercial entities, ourselves included, but also other folks that we compete with, they're highly credible, obviously, as well. We're investing heavily in brand new tech at massive scales. Like we're spending billions of dollars, all of us, in R&D, and we're seeing these amazing outcomes that come from that technology. It's actually there, it's available. In fact, one of the things we've been trying to do as a team is to make sure that that technology is actually available also to the U.S. government, so it has the ability to take that tech and leverage it in ways that help citizens and, in our case, help with the mission. We want to be able to do that. I think the number one thing that worries me and concerns me is, do we have the ability to figure out a way to actually adopt and get that technology through the systems? How do you avoid the calcification of the past? How do you get it to the point where you can move at an agile case? Because that's hard. And of course, there's necessary things we must do, so I'm not suggesting we cut corners. But I do worry about our pace of innovation, our pace of adopting innovation compared to what you might see from other countries that also have very good technology assets and massive billion-dollar investments in technology. And if they don't have any kind of delay or slowdown in adopting that, that's what you're going to see in the future. And so the question is, can we, as the U.S., maintain that leadership?
And?
I think we have to do it. We just
How?
have to.
How?
So to me, and a great example here is the CRADA and the work that we're doing. That wasn't pandering. I mean, it actually is to basically say, are there ways in which we can collaborate on new technology, try these projects, and frankly find ways that, because there's necessary reasons why we do procurement and allocations and programs that are big. They have to work in that way. If we can find ways that we can do more agile, explore the space, see what's possible, figure out the art of the possible, and then translate that and get the throughput, I do think that'd be helpful.
So what's the tolerance for failure in all that? Because you've got to be able to fail at some things, right? What's the tolerance here for failure?
And that's one of the key things for this new team that we created. It's only been like 6 months, but one of the purposes of the team was to be that kind of right in between the pure research and the kind of classic product teams that have been around for 30 years. I've been in those teams too. That's your Windows, your Office, your Xbox for Microsoft. To create something in between where we can actually celebrate, look, let's go try some hard stuff, and some of it's gonna fail. And I always tell folks in the team that it's like, look, if 100% of everything you did was a grand slam, we probably didn't try hard enough. Right, because you must have left something on the table, man. If it's that perfect, does that mean you're being risk adverse? You're trying to only pick the projects that you knew you're going to knock it out of the park, we should be figuring out other areas to try, and the main thing is to be able to fail fast, figure out when that happens, and just be able to do the pivot and be able to reward people for that versus like, oh, if everything's not perfect, then you've just taken a red flag, on your career progression. And so that's something actually that I will give Satya a significant amount of credit, even back to Bill Gates, our founder, same kind of attitude. Like if we're not trying a bunch of stuff, then we're failing. So I love that attitude.
So I can ask some more questions, but I don't like to, if anybody has some questions, there's microphones here. Happy to have you come on up, come on down. And David, do you have anything yet online?
Yes, ma'am. For students, come on down to the mic and, of course, introduce yourself, say what curriculum you are, and we'll do questions from in King Hall and a couple from online. I do have one from online if you want to.
So, yeah, and now when you're at the microphone, speak in the microphone, be like Elvis, okay? And get in the microphone, okay?
Thank you.
Why don't we go ahead and start here in King Hall? Go ahead.
Sure.
Okay.
Hi, sir. Major Ryan Gahn, Air Force. I'm from the Defense Innovation Department. One thing that, as we talk about all this new innovation and all these new technologies, the ethics come to mind. But more specifically, how does Microsoft deal with some of the questions that might come from its employees? For instance, when Google dropped out of Maven and Jedi, it was primarily because of employee protests. So as Microsoft keeps working with the DoD, how do you sort of balance that with the way people in the general public view a company's relationship with the government and DoD, and how Microsoft corporate does?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. And from a Microsoft perspective, of course, we're a very broad company. We have 170,000 employees. We operate in well over 100 countries around the world. And we do work with governments around the entire planet, right? So that is a global corporation. That's absolutely critical for us. We can and will continue to do that. We're not elected, which means we're not trying to make policy. We want to make sure that we are serving basically in the countries that we live in and work in, and that includes not just the U.S., but a bunch of those other countries around the planet as well. We want to respect those boundaries. When it comes to the employee side, we also recognize that we're a very diverse population of employees, and we're going to have folks that are on all ends of the spectrum on whatever topic it is that you come up with. And we actually celebrate that. Like, we actually recognize that and say we're actually happy with that. We want our employees to be able to express their opinions on what a particular subject is, right? So it's not our job also to tell our employees how to think. That doesn't make any sense either. And so when you come to an example like this, and you mentioned the Google example where they kind of pulled out of a particular area based on employee protests, it's not that Microsoft hasn't also had employees that have objected to us working, for example, with the Department of Defense. We absolutely have. The one thing I've always told people is, look, I am going to tell you the truth. You may not like my answer, but I'm going to be honest with you, right? We are doing this because it's important for us to do the work. We believe that it's important for us as an American company to be doing this work, but at the same time, we respect your opinion. So if you happen to be in a team that would otherwise get pulled into a project and you do not believe that you want to work on something like that, that's fantastic. Let's help you find another part of the company that you can work in. And we're such a diverse, technology portfolio that, for example, if I wanted to go work in Xbox or in gaming or one of the consumer, products, I can still do amazing work. I can still have an awesome team experience. I can still create game-changing technology, but it doesn't have to be related to this. And it's not that the military isn't the only example of that. There's going to be other examples of industries or places where a company may choose to work, but that's been our approach to that. And I think even at the end of the day, if an employee doesn't agree with us, hopefully they can at least respect the fact that we're being honest, we're being transparent, and we're trying to provide that flexibility, as opposed to, I think it would be worse, frankly, if we weren't coming back and just telling you the truth.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Ensign Brendan Gloyd. I'm a student in undersea warfare and applied math here. And my question for you is, what do you think a proportional response is to an enemy attack on private companies? And further, what, if any, securities does the private sector expect from the DoD?
Yeah, and it's a great one, just simply because of, again, if you think about the places in which we're protecting critical infrastructure. Once again, we are not elected, and we are not assigned, a mission from the Constitution or anything else. We're a public company. Therefore, we want to make sure that we are taking our guidance from the governments in the countries in which we work and in which we're actually providing products. So we want to make sure we do that. And of course, they're not all 100% the same, which means we have to honor what other countries around the world, what their rules, laws, and regulations are. And we try not to make presumptions about that. That's a value-based thing. It's our job to be there and make sure that we're running our software. And that is our goal. So that means, for example, if I think about proportional response and things like that, our job is to protect users of our software. Now, it used to be that we would build, what we call box product, because you used to be able to go to Egghead and actually buy a copy of the box and pull out the DVD, and install it. That to us was a little easier because I could just ship technology. I don't know what you're using it for. That's changed so much with the cloud because we're operating live services. Xbox Live is out there, but of course Office 365, Windows and Defender and things that are about anti-malware, antivirus, etc. We have to continue to run those. And so we have come out with a set of statements and principles about what we would do. And it includes, of course, we're going to defend users of our software. And that means all of our users, right? And we're also ensuring that, to be honest, it's not our job to figure out what should a response be at some kind of, should we pull Windows? Should we shut down services for things running hospitals because someone may disagree with that government? I think our answer is that's a policy decision that's not up to us. We're going to make sure that we're protecting users of our software. We're going to make sure that we're doing the right thing there, and then we will abide by the law and make sure that we have that correct. Then with respect to the second part of your question with response, obviously we work very closely with government agencies, basically around the world, obviously especially with the cybersecurity, folks that are within those governments, trying to make sure that we can bring our best technology, so once again, protecting users of the software. And we know our software is used for critical infrastructure. We simply have to make sure that we keep that secure. So we've got a very good set of partnerships with governments, especially in the cyberspace, collaborative agreements, again, in the notion of protecting users of our software. And if that happens to be for critical infrastructure, like it was in Ukraine, then we're going to do that. Probably one of the most interesting ones we did most recently with Ukraine was to help move the government into the cloud so that they actually had the ability to have that mobility and keep a working government orthogonal to the physical spaces that they may or may not be able to be in right now, but the government could keep going from a software perspective. So that's probably a certainly very interesting example.
While on that and any of the other questions, we have one of our international students is working on a project, and he's asked for Microsoft to have an expert alongside him, and we're working with him to do that. So if our Warrior Scholar students have things that they want to work on, they think that Microsoft could be helpful, this credit does allow for that kind of partnership with our students and Microsoft. So that kind of prompted that thought there. So good, okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I say good afternoon, sir. My name is Lieutenant Junior Grade Scott Colvin. I'm a Navy information professional. So on my last ship, I was the cyber officer. I was woken up one morning, we were in the East China Sea, it was 2 o'clock, and my IT said, "Sir, the entire ship's network crashed. We don't know what's wrong. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, we can't even call for help." In your position, what is something that is brought into your office that you deem a critical event or a catastrophic event in your line or in your position? And then also, what are your first thoughts and processes and actions to combat a catastrophic or critical event?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I spent the last 10 years building out our Azure public cloud, so I was on call 24/7 myself, 365, the entire time through. And I can tell you that the biggest things, and look, there's no comparison to that than what you folks are doing, protecting the country. So I don't even want to try to make a comparison to that. But since you asked about my space on the software side, I'll answer within that context. The biggest things I always worried about in the cloud, and we still do, it is that kind of global failure of network and the inability to get a hold of any technology. And then it's catastrophic loss of data is the other one that just really scares me and you've seen this, and I'm not going to poke at other folks, ourselves and our competitors in the the space, we've all had our own little famous incidents of taking down things. And in fact, you've started to see how the economy, especially in the West, has become so dependent on the cloud, right? If you have some kind of an outage and all of a sudden half of the apps on your phone don't work, that's the consumer version of, oh shoot, what's going on? Now, if it's trivial, I can't post a tweet right now. It's like, well, okay, fine. I can't watch Netflix. It's okay, you'll live. The stuff that worries me more though is things that are actually financial. So in the commercial space, so what if I can't trade money? What if I lost your mortgage payment on your house? Now that is actually kind of a big deal. What if the trading systems got hit? What if, and then we mentioned the pipeline case, what if we had to actually shut down the power grids, et cetera? You're getting to the point where our technology that we're running is systemic in all of those as well. So the thing that kept me up at night, because I've been up on plenty of those 2 a.m. calls, my phone goes off and I'm on the bridge until we're back up and running. My big issue is that in my case, I probably wind up on CNN, and I have a couple of times. It was kind of uncomfortable. I would have rather been on there for other reasons, but not that. But it turns out that does actually happen. And so that is one of the things to watch out for. And we're not perfect, and I know our competitors wouldn't argue they are either, because they've seen those same sorts of issues. Then with respect to combating it, you folks have got some of the, we study what you do, because you've been doing this for hundreds of years actually, and there's just a whole bunch of science around how do we think about taking action, making decisions, being able to get through. We've actually leveraged and studied a lot of what the military does. And again, this is kind of a weird thing for us, because when I'm shipping like a version of Windows and I sell it to you over the counter, I don't know what problems you've got, but when it's actually a live service running 24/7 with critical things on top of it, like I once had a hospital remind me they were unable to dispatch pharmaceutical prescriptions in a hospital because one of the systems was down. I actually brought those folks in to talk to my all-hands meeting, to every employee I had, so that everyone could see that what you're doing, yes, it's used for back-end gamings and mobile phone and the rest of that stuff, which is kind of fun, and people get annoyed when they can't play their game. But what you do matters. Like, it's actually law enforcement, it's defense. People's lives are on the line if you get this wrong, right? You folks know that 100%. That's something we can study from you. It's a little bit of a learning for a commercial company to be in that position and understand what that means, right? And that was a big kind of wake-up call. I was amazed and actually quite pleased from a culture perspective that the team embraced that and really started thinking harder about what they're doing, because usually when stuff like that happens, yeah, once in a while it's hardware, but you design for redundancy. The hardware should fix that. Most often it was change control, management, well-intentioned, nothing malicious, but people don't understand that in their efforts to try and fix something quickly, they can actually break it even worse. Those were the cultural issues that we had to work through.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ma'am, we'll take one from online and then pick it up over here on this side. The question is about the speed of innovation. You made a comment earlier about that. As a global technology corporation, you not only respond to innovation-driven change, your company drives change through your own innovation. What lessons would you give DoD to reduce friction to innovation to keep pace with emerging technology development today?
Yeah, I think number one, the step would be just awareness of how fast things are moving, right? And again, if you go back to our CRADA, this is another opportunity for us to, again, share. It's a win-win. This is just not me saying, hey, here's a bunch of cool stuff, please use it. It's we're learning, well, where are places where it's actually relevant. But I think number one is actually keeping up with the pace of this development. I mentioned just how fast AI is growing. It's massive. It's amazing. And in fact, we used to be at a point where we'd build out very expensive hardware, and it would be useful for about 18 months. I think that lifespan has kind of shrunk to about 12, just because the scale factor has gone up so quickly. But it's folded into everything we're doing. I mean, if you've got a self-driving car, or at least one that has the beta on it, you've seen the stuff in action, right? You push a little button on your steering wheel and it starts to auto steer and everything. Like wow, like there's a heck of a lot more sophisticated stuff than that coming down the pipe, and you know about some of these things already. And the systems of systems that are coming together is massive. So I think the big thing to me, awareness and understanding, this partnership thing. If you look at some of the best examples, like I think of the Manhattan Project, that was a combination of private companies, universities, and the government coming together, those three, figuring out what is the best of what we could do and not doing it in silos. Right, that was just one example. There's been other examples. When you're able to get those three things, my goodness, just like the magic that you can get is just crazy. And again, I just think in the future, what does competition look like? It may be the type of competition where it's uninhibited competition, right? So how do we actually bring down that friction level? Well, doing it in a responsible way. I mean, there's reasons, for example, why we have competitive procurements, why we have, you know, the systems that we've got. And so I don't want anybody to hear me say, I want to cut corners on that. We shouldn't do that. They're there for a reason. We should figure out how we make that go. I think the real question is, are we really exploring the art of the possible deep enough and quick enough? And then we can figure out how do we come back and bind that into a responsible way in order to get that innovation and figure out how to do it, you know, in a fair and competitive way going forward. But I do think we need to move faster, just all up.
But doesn't, when you say that it's about awareness and understanding, that requires an awful lot of focus to do that effectively. How would you change the way we focus as a country, as a people, to really grab that awareness and understanding?
And I think, and I will tell you, and again, this is one thing I can look at Microsoft again, rather than judging others. I just look at ourselves. It's hard even when you run a really large business. I've run them. I mean, a 30,000 person team my last job. I mean, like they're big businesses. They got a lot of stuff to go do. There's a day job involved with this. So you got to keep on cranking and you get kind of in that mode. So even there, we can have some problems where a team that's got those sort of deliverables can look at a research arm, can look at another team doing some really cool innovation and go, well, yeah, that sounds kind of interesting, but I also have this to go do. And I've got basically the next 3 years are booked on stuff I have to go do to make people happy. You know, that's actually a problem that we have as well, is to try and figure out and how to get that focus on that. I would say one of the things that Satya has introduced, which has been great, is actually forcing some of that innovation to be very visible to the other teams, and then figuring out ways to say, well, look, you have to actually leverage this tech. It's got to be part of what you're doing. We need to do more things together and less of the kind of siloed old cartoon, you know, with the guns in it. Like, we've got to be able to integrate things better together and do that kind of work and get that focus in there, and then create time or mechanisms. And we do like a research day once a year. We do some of these other projects where we actually go through and say, look, part of your time and your allocation for the future can't just be spent turning the crank of what you already built. We know that it'll just naturally grow at a certain kind of rate, but that's how you actually miss the future. And by the way, as a company, we have done and missed the future before, right? Nobody probably even remembers. If you remember back, Windows Mobile was for phone operating systems, and we owned 20% share in market as a company. We were actually one of the bigger players. And then the iPhone came along, right? And then so did Android, right? And so it was a big transition for us and a learning experience. So we've had cases where we did miss the boat on the next big wave, right? And then cases where we have actually figured it out. I actually give, Steve Ballmer, former CEO, Satya, credit for seeing the cloud was coming and actually investing in it early, like 20 years ago, actually. Because otherwise, we would have been one of those companies with a legacy that didn't turn the corner. And we actually made it and turned that corner, but we don't always get it right. But so again, I just pick on ourselves. We still have a lot to learn. But in the cases where I feel good about where we've hit it, we try and learn more from that and try and avoid the cases or learn from the cases where we actually missed the ball and wound up behind everyone else.
Thank you both. Next question.
Hello, sir. Lieutenant Alexander Stanislav. I'm in the systems engineering program here. I had a question from the perspective of looking at the Ukraine war and getting your perspective. A cyber skeptic might say, hey, we've been talking for years and years about this being, cyber warfare being a decisive capability. In this conversation, you already just talked about how turning off major infrastructure, that would be a great tool for our adversary. And in this situation, we had the Russians, who we thought were great cyber power, attacking this country, and we haven't seen any sort of decisive results from this. And a cyber skeptic might say, hey, this is the tech sector kind of doing a Y2K in the news saying, oh, this is a bad thing that's going to happen that never happens now. What is your perspective on that? Is it we've done so much work that hasn't happened, or is there something else here? How do you just respond to the cyber skeptic saying we haven't seen anything decisive, even though we've talked a lot about it?
Yeah, and the only thing I'd remind folks is the sophistication level has continued to go up every year, and it accelerates. And so, and the only good thing we have is our offensive capabilities, or defensive capabilities, I should say in this case, have actually also gone up, right? I can tell you that if these same attacks had been hitting us as a company probably 5 years ago, we probably would have had a harder time dealing with them because we didn't have the infrastructure yet. It's only through collecting trillions of signals and storing petabytes of data a day and using machine learning that we've been able to keep up with this kind of cat and mouse game that comes through. And I'd say that, you know, the commercial example, I think that was a good one, and this was covered in testimony, was the pipeline case. Like, so take that one. That was a case where, and again, I'm just quoting what I remember from the congressional hearings that went on, but essentially an attacker was able to get in on the IT side. They were able to use a classic phishing attempt to get in there. The question is, well, why did an IT attack shut down the operational tech, the OT side? Like, the pipeline got shut down. And the answer was because we can't prove that they didn't make their way over to that system. And so if I can come in on one side and land on the other and do something nasty, now what's going to happen, right? And so, like, this is a good example of there's that fear and uncertainty about what's going to happen. You take a conservative approach, which, you know, I guess they probably made the right decision, because if someone had gotten to the OT side, if they could actually go flood a bunch of pipelines, if they could actually cause that catastrophic damage, like, my gosh, what would happen? And then you have to ask the question is, if they have those capabilities, what would be the triggers for them wanting to exercise them? And have we seen them yet? Again, back to the skeptic. Is it so much that they don't have the capabilities, or that we haven't hit a trigger point where they want to use them? And then the real question is, then what do you want to do about protecting those systems? And especially, I would argue, some of our systems that have been around for a while and that, you know, perhaps started off being very robust, but over a number of decades have been added to, have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And I can tell you from a software perspective, eventually systems like that fall over, which means you're going to have a problem. So I feel like there's a good opportunity for us to get out there and be proactive. We've been very proactive on malware, on, you know, the ransomware and those sorts of things. I do think the next thing, again, from a civilian side, is going to be this critical infrastructure. And that's going to be a target. How do you protect that? And it seems like something that it's really not something you should ever allow yourself to fail, or to assume that, well, these guys aren't just going to get smarter than us. You know, they'll just never quite keep up with us. It's like, you know, I've seen some of the payloads. That solar wind attack that they did on the supply chain is incredibly sophisticated, right? The level of sophistication going all the way down to the potential for what one could potentially do in hardware and other things like that, kind of scary. And if I think forward to quantum and basically quantum and encryption and the ability to go crack RSA, like, okay, now what does that mean to the country and to our allies in a world in which people can crack crypto? Like, my goodness, these feel like bets we should really be making. So, you know, that would be my answer to the to the skeptic. It's like, that's not a bet I'd want to get wrong.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Afternoon, sir. Captain Nick Royer, Marine Corps. So you said multiple times, hey, Microsoft is a transnational entity. You're not a government. You don't make policy. But when you think about it, I mean, like, the Stasi would have loved to have insight into the private lives of people, like some of your competitors have, like Google. Google's would have killed to have the propaganda reach of Facebook. So in many ways, entities like Microsoft do have power that state actors only would have had about 50 years ago. So as a member of the public, taking off the DoD hat for a moment, how does the public hold a quasi-state power entity like Microsoft accountable if, for example, there's this technology that someone's developing and the public believes it not to be in the public's interest or in the national interest? How does an organization like Microsoft that doesn't have a traditional governance structure, how is it held accountable to the public interest, not just its own corporate interest?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question, especially as you look at our technology is just moving so fast. I would tell you, just like in our own experience, since I've been at the company for 30 years, I was there for the Justice Department, the EU, and the rest of it, the antitrust lawsuits that Microsoft went through. And I can tell you at the time that my personal attitude on that was, how dare you slow me down? My God, like everybody, keep in mind, this is 20 years ago. It's like everybody's lining up for Windows. They love Windows. What do you mean you're telling me wow, government, you're slowing us down. You're not making, wow. So I can tell you as a more junior engineer at the time, that was kind of my attitude. I can tell you that as a company, we learned from that though. And the big thing was the recognition and that in order to be a responsible, like we are able and privileged to be a commercial company because we actually are a U.S. company, because we're able to work in democracies around the world, and we're invited to be able to operate in countries around the world. That's our opportunity for that. And most of the government officials that we talk to, what they're trying to do is they're looking out for their country and their citizenship, and that's, of course, what they should be doing. And we want to also then not come in and basically say that we know everything, because we don't. And like I said, we're not elected officials. And so even in cases where we have discussions around what policy should we pursue, a core part of that is to basically say, look, we should not be going in and trying to make policy that actually asserts itself on other governments, or et cetera. And we've actually tried to work very hard with governments on regulation and where it's required. And hopefully you would have seen us publish several different types of guidance. Like we did the Digital Geneva Convention, that we actually set out a set of AI ethics. We were one of the first companies to come out and say we don't think you should use facial recognition yet in law enforcement. The bias and error rates are just too high, and we don't really want you taking action on technology that we don't think is actually ready either. So hopefully those are at least an attempt by us to try and be responsible and to figure out how do we integrate in and help, but kind of walk that line so we're not pushing in the other direction. And beyond that, there's of course a lot of philosophy involved in it, but that's at least from a Microsoft perspective what we're trying to do. Hopefully trying to apply. We're a 45-year-old company. If there's anything I hope we do is to take some humility and hopefully a little bit of wisdom from doing stuff wrong along the way, learning from it and figuring out where we need to go in the future. And that has to be a partnership with governments as well, and not just a technology company saying, well, I did it because I could and it was cool and I'm a comp sci major. It's pretty neat, isn't it? And then not actually understand the social ramifications or the ethical ramifications. That's not something you should be doing. Like there's a point in time where we have to actually decide, yeah, you could do it, but should you? And let's make sure that we're having that conversation first and being principled about it. And we won't be perfect. I wouldn't want to claim that. I don't want to kind of sit up here and say we've gotten everything right and we will always get it. I wouldn't say that at all. I'm sure we're absolutely going to learn. We're going to make mistakes. But that's an important part of the process also, is learning from those.
Another question from online, sir. And we probably have time for one more from King Hall if somebody would like to come down and ask a final question. This question is about your long-term goals. And the question is, how do you incorporate compatibility between systems you are working on and other systems in the market? We work with partners who do not use the same platforms, so there is a concern that we will become too siloed into the systems we are used to, that we lose the leverage that comes with working with others.
Yeah, it feels like there's probably two parts to that question. I mean, one of them is maintaining that longer-term compatibility, not leaving folks stuck. That's another lesson we kind of learned the hard way, basically by shipping new versions of Windows and new versions of other things as well. And we actually put in a significant amount of work to try and maintain that compatibility. And I argue actually this kind of more agile effect of not just doing the big bang, the big, it took me 10 years to get here, but here's the new thing. The good news is it's 100% better and or 10% better and 100% different. It's going to be great, right? I mean, like just never really works. We want to be careful about that. It seems like the other part that is hinting in there, especially the mention of other vendors, is probably around the notion of what about ecosystems and how do we make sure that those are actually compatible. That's also super important, and we contribute to a bunch of open source and open source efforts and things like that as well, just to make sure, because we do believe you got to have choice, you got to have flexibility between vendors and things like that. Of course, we're going to compete like crazy because that's our job. But we do want to make sure that at the end, also, what's best for the customer? And I'd say that's another thing over the years from a Microsoft perspective that we've tried to refocus ourselves. Ask not just what's good for us, but what's good for our customers. Again, it won't be perfect. Trying to make sure that but it is something important to us.
So let me do a couple of things here to wrap up. So the CRADA is doing some extraordinary things already, and we've not even really been in the start of this. One of the things I was told about today was there is going to be a Student Technology Spectrum event at Microsoft in Redmond, and this is one of the first steps towards the engagement with Microsoft with us. There is an agenda being drafted, And we have 9 students and an escort and funding for this first tranche for the 21st and 22nd of June, going up to 21st, coming back to 22nd, obviously. The funding is likely to be through the NPS Foundation, through the Naval Warfare Studies Institute, and they're going to focus on the cloud-enhanced networks that Dr. Winchell Lamb is leading. So that is going to happen, and we're working to see what kind of faculty interest there might be in all of that. But these are the kind of things that you all can think about. Work on your theses with Microsoft partners and experts. Think about these visits up to Redmond. In this case, they're going to go over the state of the practice of a number of areas in cyber security. This is the kind of partnership that we're talking about, and so I encourage everybody here that might have an interest in that to talk to Dr. Land, Dr. Commander Chad Bowman, Colonel Pugh over at NWSI, and talk to them about these possibilities. Jason, this has been a terrific engagement. You've got a lot of things that you're doing. From here, you're heading to Europe again. What would you want to say as some final thoughts about what we need to think about and what the possibilities are of this partnership in the new ways of thinking about educating, researching, exploring, creating? You know, there's a saying that if you can imagine it, it's possible. And that's both for good and bad. But if one can use human imagination, then that leads to human creation and the possibilities of things really being different. What would be your final words to us as to how we can think about these things and leverage, and as we lean forward toward new ways of learning and creating?
Yeah, thank you. And I think from a closing perspective, I think we've already got some very exciting, basically parts of the creative that we're going to work on. The biggest thing to me, and you said it, Admiral, which I thought was great, which was thinking about the culture and giving ourselves permission to take risk and know that it's not always going to pay off. Because if you really want to explore what's possible, you're going to have to take some risks. And I honestly feel like that's one of the best things about this country. I mean, the fact that we went to the moon, the fact that we've done these just amazing things, my gosh, how much risk was involved with that? It's just crazy. So the fact that we've done these things and they've been so advanced, it's like, okay, now here's the next generation. And it's our opportunity to think about, what is that future going to look like? How should we shape it? What things should we be asking? How would we go back and go do that? And it's not going to happen if we don't give ourselves permission to think big and go try. And of course, we're going to also get results. We want both, right? We want to be able to do that. But I think taking that cultural permission to say, let's go explore that area and see what's possible, man, that's just really exciting. So I hope that we can bottle that spirit up and go find some of these projects and be able to leverage that.
Well, we thank you, sir, very much. Please let's give Jason a round of applause.